Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering my pick for one of, if not the most fun character to play in Baldur's Gate 3. In my recent tier list of how fun I thought each class was, I said that this was an S+ tier class, one of my very favorite characters to play, and then I realized I hadn't actually done a guide for it. So today we're going to be talking about Wild Magic Sorcerer, how to make it good, how to overcome the drawbacks and mitigate the randomness to enable your strategies to succeed, and also how to enjoy playing this incredibly fun, thematic, and powerful class. Wild Magic Sorcerer is a creature of extremes. It's got very high highs and correspondingly low lows. It's one of the most powerful classes in the game, but it will sometimes afflict you with random chance that can turn fights against you and force you to react on the fly. If you enjoy that kind of tactical thinking and also think that everybody turning into sheep is funny, then this is definitely the character for you. Before I begin, I would like to say thank you so much to RMD for the $20 donation, Justin Sipla for the $50 donation, thank you so much, that's incredibly generous of you, Davin for becoming a channel member, Justin Sipla also for becoming a channel member again, and MXF5000 for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support, it really does mean a lot, and I hope it's not a hardship. Alright, let's get in and start talking about Wild Magic Sorcerer. I'm using the Halfling Hireling as the example character here because, of course, Halfling I think is the best race in general for a sorcerer, and I think it's even more pronounced for Wild Magic Sorcerers. Halfling gives you the ability to reroll ones, and Sorcerer has naturally Constitution save proficiency. So with those two things, you almost never fail a concentration save when the amount of damage you take is relatively low. That's especially important for Wild Magic Sorcerer because there's a couple Wild Magic effects that do small amounts of damage to you. For example, you can set yourself on fire, take 1d6 damage every turn, and the ability to basically guaranteed pass those trivial concentration checks is very important. You want to be concentrating on something every turn of combat as a sorcerer, almost always, and so keeping concentration on those effects, even through the wild magic incoming damage and occasional concentration checks that you're going to get, can be extremely valuable. Also, it just feels good when you are adding a bunch of randomness to your character to add some ways to mitigate the randomness that the game already inherently has. Of course, if you don't want to play a halfling, any race can work, although the normally very powerful ones are very powerful here as well, like Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed, Githyanki for the once per day Misty Step and medium armor proficiency, and in fact any character that gets medium armor or light armor and shields, any race that gets those, can give you quite a bit of additional extra armor class. Shield proficiency is also very good for sorcerers, so definitely worth keeping in mind as well. For our subclass, we are of course taking Wild Magic Sorcerer, which gets us two class features, and I think it's worth talking about these two class features right from the beginning so that we understand what we're working with. The first and most impressive is going to be Wild Magic. Wild Magic causes random effects whenever you cast a spell. By default, there is a 1 in 20 chance of you having one of these wild magic effects trigger whenever you cast a spell. So 1 in every 20 spell casts, you're going to get a random wild magic effect. However, you can increase the chance of this happening by using Tides of Chaos, which gives you advantage on an attack roll, skill check, or saving throw, so anything, basically, any 20-sided die roll, can be given advantage with Tides of Chaos, and if you do that, it increases the chance of a Wild Magic Surge from happening, increases the chance of a Wild Magic Surge happening from 5% to 50%. That's a 10 times increase and makes it significantly more likely that you're going to see a Wild Magic Surge after using Tides of Chaos. Of the Wild Magic Surges that are possible, there are 23 in Baldur's Gate possible options, and so each of those, and a couple that are basically duplicates. So I would say that any individual wild magic effect has a roughly 1 in 400 chance of happening on any given spellcast, which is exactly the same chances as rolling 2 natural 20s or 2 natural 1s in a row. Obviously that happens a lot throughout the course of the game, so you can see that you're going to see a lot of these effects over the course of your playthrough, and any time that an effect would be the only thing that could lose you a combat could happen, it is very possible that that effect will come up. That, I think, is really fun because it means that in almost every combat, or in many combats, something interesting and different is going to happen that's going to force you to change your playstyle as you are going through the combat or going through the encounter, which is something that often doesn't occur. Especially on Honor mode, high difficulties are especially vulnerable to this, but on any game mode, Baldur's Gate can sometimes devolve into taking the same powerful action over and over every turn of combat. Wild Magic will force you to reevaluate your plan in the middle, and so we need to build our character in a way that is flexible, able to deal with any of the situations that it might create with for ourselves in order to be able to respond whenever something unexpected happens. I think that that's an extremely interesting tactical playstyle and something that makes this character really fun and cool, and I'll talk more as we go through about how we're building the character in order to respond to what wild magic effects come up. First, of course, we need to actually build our level 1 character, so let's take a look at our ability scores. And as always with a sorcerer, we are going to be taking as much charisma as we can get, and we are going to need none of this intelligence stuff. I think there are basically 2 ability score splits that we can go with. We can either do 10 wisdom and 16 Constitution and 14 Dexterity to get 17 Charisma and get the Actor feat, or if we don't want that, we can go 16 and get 12 Wisdom for an improved Wisdom save. Either of those ability splits are going to be very good. This 17 Wisdom split can also be used with Anti-Ethel's Hair if that's something that you want to do to get an additional feat, and that is also very powerful. But all of these options are very good. The Actor feat is kind of nice for this character because Wild Magic Sorcerer uniquely has, I think, one of the best abilities to be a party face of any sorcerer, because Tides of Chaos can give you advantage on any skill check that includes dialogue rolls, so this character makes one of the best party faces of any possible sorcerer. So I like to go with this split so that we can improve our ability to make dialogue checks as much as possible. For that reason, we are going to not take Deception or Performance. Obviously, this character has it as a background, but you'll probably want to take like Guild Artisan or another background that doesn't give you Performance or Deception as your character background, and then make sure that we have the other dialogue skills that we want. Persuasion is very important. You can take Intimidation as well, and this character can be a truly excellent party face with the advantage from Tides of Chaos. For our cantrip selection, I think that Wild Magic Sorcerer again has some really interesting things going on with its cantrips. Because you can always have advantage on attack rolls, or once per short rest you can gain advantage on attack rolls, we're more encouraged to take cantrips with attack rolls. For that reason, I actually highly suggest getting Minor Illusion and other utility cantrips on a different character in your party, and taking both Ray of Frost and Bone Chill on this character. Normally, I don't suggest getting 2 attack cantrips on the same character, because I think you will typically just want whichever one is best for that character. You don't need 2 different ones. But both of these have quite a lot of utility. Ray of Frost slowing things down, and Bone Chill preventing enemies from healing are both excellent utility, and because you can land them so reliably with this character, I think it's really nice to have both attack utility cantrips available to be used with Tides of Chaos. For our other cantrips, we are going to want Friends. If you're a party face, obviously this is very good on difficulties below Tactician, but on Tactician or Honor can also be used if you then just leave the area. It just counts as committing a crime, and so it's still just very good to give you the additional option of passing your dialogue checks more easily. And finally, we probably want Mage Hand. Mage Hand is very good with any character that's going to be dealing lightning damage, because you can throw bottles of water with it, which is very powerful, and that gives you an additional option. It also lets you set up all kinds of other shenanigans with Mage Hand, which are very useful for this character, so I definitely recommend having it on this character. For our level 1 spell selection, we are going to take Chromatic Orb and Shield. I think that you could also get away with Magic Missile, but this character does better with attack rolls than other sorcerer characters, and so having Chromatic Orb at level 1 is very powerful as well. Again, because this character is a Wild Magic Sorcerer, which gets fewer spells than the other two Sorcerer variants, fewer spells known, we have to be pretty selective with which spells we take. We need to be able to respond to any possible situation, because we're going to be creating a lot of weird situations with our Wild Magic. Chromatic Orb is extremely flexible because it has 6 different modes, so it gives you a ton of modality when you're choosing what to do when you're fighting the potential things that could come up from your wild magic. And so having access to all of the different elemental damage types, or ice surfaces, or lightning damage for double damage if the enemy is wet, all of which are possible things that can happen from your wild magic surges, is extremely valuable. So I think Chromatic Orb, aside from just being one of the best spells in the game already, is especially good for this character. Alright, that's our level 1 build. Let's move on to level 2. At level 2, we have 2 decisions to make: which spell we're going to take and which meta magic we're going to take. Luckily, both of these decisions are very easy. For our spell, we're going to take Magic Missile. Magic Missile is incredibly powerful for this character, of course, because it rolls no dice. This character has a lot of randomness baked in, and so having a spell that we can just always rely on is going to be incredibly useful to get us out of any situations that we might cause through our own actions. Being able to just know that something is going to work is very valuable when you don't know what tactical situations you're going to face. I think that Magic Missile, Chromatic Orb, and Shield are the best level 1 spells for sorcerers in general, and for wild magic sorcerers in particular, I think that they will serve you way better than the other options, so that's a relatively easy selection. For our meta magic selections, we're going to take Twin Spell, which is very valuable. This starts breaking the action economy, which is what sorcerers are for, taking multiple turns when every other character is only taking a single turn. With Twin Spell, we basically cast 2 spells for the price of 1, and it's especially good with Chromatic Orb because it can let us set up multiple surfaces if we are using the lightning surface or the ice surface especially, which can help us crowd control multiple enemies. An enemy on the ice surface will lose their turn if they fall over, and so setting those up under multiple enemies with Chromatic Orb is incredibly valuable when using Twin Spell. For our second spell here, we're just going to take Distant Spell, and this is pretty useful because our positioning will be somewhat restricted when we're playing Wild Magic Sorcerer, because we want to be playing away from at least part of our party, so that we don't hit them with the negative effects by accident. And that means that we will sometimes be further away from enemies than we might want, or even closer to enemies than we might want. But Distant Spell will allow us to hit enemies even in those situations where we need to be pretty far back in order to operate safely, and is just the best of the sorcerer meta magics anyways, but especially good for wild magic sorcerer. We don't need to replace a spell because we already have the 3 best spells, so let's go on to level 3. Although one thing to note about ice surfaces, I should mention this as well, is that if the worst case scenario happens and the 2 worst rolls occur for Wild Magic Sorcerer, and you summon either a Mephit or a Cambion at the early levels, which are the worst things that can happen to you at the early levels, both of those enemies fly, and so you won't be able to use ice surfaces to stop them. You can use Ray of Frost to slow them down and try to get away, and I highly recommend having Longstrider in your party to give you more movement speed, because it is very important that you be able to run away if the unthinkable happens and the worst case scenario drops in your lap. At level 3, we are going to take, as our spell selection, again focusing here on reliability, Cloud of Daggers. Cloud of Daggers is one of the best things for us to concentrate on because it is going to always work. It is also, and I think it's sort of important to note, the best single target damage spell at this level, in addition to being the best AoE damage spell. It has no saving throw, so it's always going to do its average of 10 damage on casting it, but the damage happens both when you cast it and at the beginning of the enemy's turn. That means that a single cast of Cloud of Daggers on a single enemy averages 20 damage. Compare that to the average 21 damage of Scorching Ray, but Scorching Ray needs to hit with all the attack rolls to get that 21 damage. You can see that Cloud of Daggers is better at single target damage than the premier single target damage spell at this level, so I think that it is just unbelievably strong and always worth taking on any sorcerer. We also would highly want to consider Misty Step, but I think we can get away with delaying that for 1 level here, because we don't want to give up any of our level 1 spells at this point. They're all too valuable for us. But we will, of course, grab Quicken Spell. This lets us cast even more spells in a turn because it is just such an incredibly powerful feature. This lets us use our bonus action to cast a second spell, so now we can cast Cloud of Daggers and Ray of Frost in the same turn if we want to, or Cloud of Daggers and Chromatic Orb in the same turn if we really want to blow all our resources, and then we can set up an ice surface in the Cloud of Daggers and trap enemies in it for multiple turns, which is, of course, even more powerful than just by default. No other decisions to make because we aren't replacing a spell at this level, so let's level up to level 4. At level 4, we are going to take Actor to bring our Charisma up to 18. If you're either using Anti-Ethel's Deal or took the 16 Charisma split, then you would just take an ability improvement. Other options here, you could take Alert. This is especially good on Honor Mode, and Initiative is very important for Wild Magic Sorcerers, especially. Obviously, it's great for all characters, but for Wild Magic Sorcerers even more so, because having the information of what the tactical situation is going to be is very important to play in the rest of your turn. You'll almost always want your Wild Magic Sorcerer to go first in combat, even if you have like the shared initiative with multiple allies, because then the rest of your turn can be built around what happened during your Wild Magic turn, and you have more information to work with. Generally speaking, this is true in all strategy games, but isn't something that comes up that often in Baldur's Gate. You want to gain as much information as possible when you have a hidden information variable when you're planning your strategy before you actually execute on other things. So taking this turn, which can create new situations first, gives you more information to work with for your later turns. That's just a small digression about strategy, but is very useful, and why Alert is also very good for this character. But here we take Actor, we get Deception and Performance Expertise without even having to have selected those as skills, so now we have some of the best party face options in the entire game, great dialogue skills on this character, and we can give ourselves advantage with Tides of Chaos. For our cantrip selection, we're going to go ahead and take a utility cantrip. Another copy of Minor Illusion is very useful. Light is very useful at this point going into Act 2, so we might take that. Or Blade Ward if we think we might need the defenses. Sorry, I had to cut the video for a second there because I was attacked by an enormous sneeze when I wanted to save headphone users. Alright, so, as I was saying, we will want to take a utility cantrip at this point. If we don't have Minor Illusion in our party, we definitely want that. We can now use it to cluster enemies for Cloud of Daggers, or we can take something along the lines of Light, which will be very useful for Act 2, or Blade Ward, which can help defend us if we get into a really bad situation for a turn. Less useful on this character than on other characters in general, I think, just because of your low hit points, but still can be valuable to keep you alive if you get isolated. In general, though, if we have Minor Illusion, I'm going to recommend taking Light on this character because it can be very useful going into Act 2. For our spell selection here, we are going to grab Misty Step. Misty Step is the ultimate panic button and very important for this character. If you summon a Cambion or something next to you, you definitely want to be able to escape. Now, Misty Step does have the problem that it's a leveled spell. It's a spell of level 1 or higher, so it can trigger Wild Magic Surges. But it's still just so valuable to have this as a panic button that we definitely need it. We still have all selected only the best spells, so we don't need to replace a spell at this point. All of these spells will stay relevant all the way through the entire game, so we're unlikely to replace them at any point, but especially not this early, so we are going to move on to the next level. At level 5, we get access to our 3rd level spells. These are the most powerful spells in the game, and a huge power spike for sorcerers. Wild Magic Sorcerer, of course, is no exception. However, I think we still just want to pick one 3rd level spell that is going to be our mainstay combat spell at this point, and then we'll continue to fill out our collection as we continue to level up, because our 1st and 2nd level spell selection at this point is so good that I'm hesitant to replace any of them, even with the incredible 3rd level spells. For our spell here, therefore, we are going to look to what we need in our party. Either you are going to take haste if you have other characters that benefit extremely strongly from haste. On honor mode, that can be Eldritch Knights, that can be Eldritch Knights, that can be Warlocks, which benefit a lot from the extra haste action, or other spellcasters. And on lower difficulties, that can be any melee attacker or ranged attacker that gains a lot of additional attacks from the haste action. If you don't have a huge value party member to cast haste on, or multiple party members who it's incredibly valuable to cast haste on, then I think that the best default combat spell at this point is going to be Hypnotic Pattern. This gives us a gigantic AoE disable, which is something that we don't currently have. We've got decent damage from Chromatic Orb and from Cloud of Daggers already, and so Hypnotic Pattern, while it is concentration and conflicts with Cloud of Daggers in that way, gives us the ability to just win an encounter all by itself and isolate various groups of enemies. This is especially important if we get one of the negative effects that disables our party in some way by turning ourselves or our allies into animals, or by causing various issues with our ability to act, because it will let us split up combat and fight enemies one at a time. This is also useful if we get one of the summons, the enemy summons, the Mephits or Cambions, because Hypnotic Pattern can be used to break up the fight and cause us to only have to take on one enemy at a time, and so it's very useful even in worst case scenarios, as well as just being a fight winning spell on its own. So I think you're choosing between those two depending on your exact party makeup. I'm going to say that Hypnotic Pattern is a great default here, although of course we're going to pick up the other ones as we continue to level up. At this point also, at Sorcerer level 6, or at Character level 6, is I think the best point to multiclass if you are going to take a multiclass. A level of Wizard or a level of Cleric here can be very good. I'll talk a little bit more about those at the end, but this is the point where I would make that choice. But if we're continuing on down Sorcerer, then we get access to a couple things. One, we get Bend Luck, which is very good. It's basically Guidance, which is an incredibly powerful spell, and Bend Luck just costs sorcery points, which are a resource that we can recharge relatively easily, to give ourselves a huge bonus on every ability. Between Tides of Chaos and Bend Luck, we can now be even better at being a party face, at passing skill checks, and provide a ton of extra utility to our party. This is, I think, one of the great reasons to be in Wild Magic Sorcerer, is that we get access to Bend Luck as well as Tides of Chaos, giving us quite a lot of manipulation over dice rolls. Especially if we're also playing a halfling, we will almost never fail per dialogue checks thanks to our expertise from Actor, as well as all these abilities to manipulate the check. And this also makes us much better at passing various important saves or skill checks that you can make later on in the game, some of which are very important to pass on honor mode, like the Zaithisk or the Mirror, and those are things that Wild Magic Sorcerer is uniquely good at amongst all characters, which is one of the fun things about this character. We also get an additional spell, and the spell that we're going to take here is going to be Counterspell. It's so important to have Counterspell in every party that even though we could take Haste, we could take Fear, we could take Sleet Storm, all of those would be very good options. I think that Counterspell is going to be our best choice at this level, in addition to our mainstay combat spell, because you will just always need to be able to turn off enemy spellcasting, and Counterspell is just one of the best defensive reactions in the game. This character now has great uses for its reactions. Against spellcasters, you have Counterspell. Against melee attackers or just attack roll characters, you have Shield, and so you will always have stuff to do both on your turn and off, which is one of the best places in the game to be, and one of the reasons that Wild Magic Sorcerer and sorcerers in general are so fun. At level 7, we get more sorcery points and our 4th level spell slots, but we're actually not going to take a 4th level spell at this point, I think. I think you could. There are certainly some that would be very good, like Ice Storm or Wall of Fire, but honestly I think that going back for Haste is just too good at this point. There's going to be a lot of fights where our spell selection is not going to be giving us the most opportunities because we have a fairly limited spell selection as a sorcerer. So the ability to twin cast haste in fights where we're not easily able to otherwise contribute means that our character can always fall back on playing support, which is something that is just extremely valuable to be able to do. Now that we have two other powerful concentration spells in the form of haste and in the form of hypnotic pattern, we could at this point do a replace, and if you find that you are not casting Cloud of Daggers because you're concentrating on hypnotic pattern instead, or you're concentrating on haste instead, you can replace Cloud of Daggers with Ice Storm. This will give you a non-concentration high-level spell that you can use, and it does a lot of damage. It can help clear out smaller enemies very easily, and it sets up a giant ice surface, which knocks a bunch of enemies over, so it's a non-concentration crowd control spell. That is definitely a powerful option, but if you're still using Cloud of Daggers, you can also just stick with Cloud of Daggers for the rest of the game. It will certainly never serve you badly. I think that on balance, we're going to be using our low-level spell slots more for Chromatic Orb, more for Shield, more for Misty Step at this point, so I'm going to recommend swapping out to a higher-level spell, but either way is going to be extremely strong at this level. At Sorcerer level 8, we get another feat, and at this point, I think we definitely want to take Alert. This is where winning initiative starts being really important because a lot of enemies are going to be just too dangerous to let them get turns on honor mode, and between Ice Storm, Chromatic Orbs, Ice Surfaces, and Hypnotic Pattern, we have a lot of ways to disable enemies before they get to act, so going first is incredibly powerful. Also, for all the reasons that I talked about with Wild Magic Sorcerer, for information access, for action economy, for just being first to act, of course, Alert is the best feat on Honor Mode, and most characters that are intended for Honor Mode should get it, so this will help you mitigate some of the randomness while you've added in randomness. This prevents enemies from going first and one-shotting you, which is one way to randomly lose, and I think it's pretty good to get rid of some ways to randomly lose when we've added in a couple more ways to randomly lose by virtue of the class we're playing. For our spell selection here, we are looking for spells that are either going to be ones that will give us a lot of options in various encounters, such as Sleet Storm being a very large AoE ice surface is very good, but we now have two ways to make ice surfaces, so I don't think we need it necessarily. So the spell that I'm going to recommend taking here is Wall of Fire. Wall of Fire is very good because it just solves some encounters, and there's also some turns where it's going to be incredibly valuable given Wild Magic Surges. For example, if you open a fight with Wall of Fire and get the action surge, then that will allow you to have the Wall of Fire going while taking another turn, which is very good as well. So there's a lot of different options here that you can use Wall of Fire for. As well, there's some encounters that it just completely wins on its own. Any encounter with a narrow hallway or where enemies are forced to come towards you, Wall of Fire just instantly wins that encounter. So I think it's very good to have it in your party. At level 9, we get access to 5th level spells, but there's actually none that I think we really want in this spot. We could take Cloud Kill or Cone of Cold to give us some more damage options, or Hold Monster if we're using various ways to boost our save DC up really high, can all be reasonable spells to take, but because Wild Magic Sorcerer's spell selection is so constrained, I think it's more important to have options to do just about anything that we'll need to do at this stage. And one thing that we're missing is a really high damage option for small numbers of enemies, and so I'm going to recommend that we go back and we grab Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt gives us, you can usually hit 2 enemies with it, and if you get them wet by throwing water at them with your Mage Hand, or another character with Create Water or something like that, then this just gives us a really high damage option at this stage in the game, which is quite valuable, especially because there's a lot of enemies that we are going to need to defeat without giving them a turn. Hypnotic Pattern is very good for that, of course, and of course we could go back for other crowd control spells, but I think that this character can't afford the normal strategy of taking every crowd control spell, taking Fear, taking Sleet Storm, taking Hypnotic Pattern, and so on, because your spell selection is so limited. Wild Magic Sorcerer gets only the default number of spells available to Sorcerer. You don't get any additional spells known, like from Storm Sorcerer, so you really have to make sure that you have all your bases covered. In this case, we're going to go back for Lightning Bolt so we can delete enemies that really need deleting. At level 10, we get to take another meta magic selection, and there's a few here that are pretty interesting. I like Heightened Spell on this one because there are a couple. Obviously, we have some save DC spells. We have Hypnotic Pattern most notably. Giving enemies disadvantage on this is going to make sure that they fail their saves very frequently, and that is extremely valuable. If we can boost our save DC high enough, this will also give us access to things like Hold Monster, which we can use combined with the disadvantage, and that is indeed the spell that we're going to select at this level. Combined with the disadvantage, this can take any enemy that's not undead out of the fight, which is very, very valuable and will make it often for multiple turns as well, because the disadvantage means they're very likely to fail the first saving throw. For our cantrip selection here, we are going for the ultimate utility of annoying haters in the comments, and we're going to grab True Strike. Even worse on this character than on other characters, because we already have sources of advantage on important attack rolls. At level 11, we get access to our next subclass feature, which is Controlled Chaos. This is a truly terrible tooltip, by the way, so how this works is when an enemy casts a spell, you can use your reaction to force them to have a Wild Magic Surge go off. Usually you aren't going to want to do this because Wild Magic Surges are generally beneficial. You get about 65% of the Wild Magic Surges are good for the caster, so you don't want to give Wild Magic Surges to enemies. That being said, there are some circumstances where it can work out, and it is also very funny if an endgame boss turns themselves into a cat by casting a spell, so Controlled Chaos can be very hilarious, even if it's not necessarily the optimal choice at most times. For our spell selection here, we are going to take Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning is just so good at winning encounters. I think it's just too good for sorcerers to pass up on at this point, because we do want another damage spell. We have a mid-level damage spell from Lightning Bolt. That's going to be our main damage spell, and Chain Lightning just complements that by giving us the ability to blow up a whole group of enemies. You can no longer twin cast Chain Lightning when casting it as the actual sorcerer spell, although there are ways around that, which I'll talk about in a second. But Chain Lightning is still just so good for this character that I think it is worth learning at this level anyways. Another option, and here's a spell that I don't normally recommend for most characters, is Disintegrate. Wild Magic Sorcerers are uniquely good at landing Disintegrate, and there are a couple encounters where Disintegrate is incredibly strong. We have Bend Luck and Tides of Chaos, which gives us the ability to land Disintegrate much more frequently. Bend Luck can give the enemies minus 1d4 on their dexterity save. Excuse me, I'm sneezing a lot while recording this, so if you're noticing weird cuts, then I'm just trying to cut around the sneezes to save everyone's ears. Anyways, Disintegrate, you can give them minus 1d4 on their saving throw, so you can land Disintegrate much more often because you have the inbuilt Bend Luck, Bane, or Bless, which is very, very powerful. It's sort of a cutting words that you can apply both positively and negatively. It's a smaller bonus, but cutting words is really, really good. If you combine that with actual cutting words as well, then you can almost guarantee that enemies fail saves with Heightened Spell, Bend Luck, and cutting words, so you can land this Disintegrate very reliably. If you land Disintegrate, it's a lot of damage. So this character can use Disintegrate better than most other characters, but I still think that for general purposes, Chain Lightning is going to be your best bet. And then finally, at character level 12, we're going to go ahead and grab our feat. We're going to max out our charisma, because we want the highest save DCs and attack rolls possible. And for our spell selection, we're going to go ahead and grab Globe of Invulnerability. This just wins every encounter in the late game. Almost every late game boss fight is a damage race, and Globe of Invulnerability also makes you very safe. Even if your Wild Magic Surges cause something terrible to happen, you will at least be invulnerable, unless that terrible thing breaks your concentration. So that's part of why I think being a halfling is so good for this character, because you can maintain concentration more easily than any other character. Globe of Invulnerability just gives you a lot of additional safety, and even though Wild Magic Sorcerers often want to play away from their allies, it's still just so good to set this up and sit in it as a party in a lot of late game boss fights, that it is always worth grabbing. If you have another character who has access to it, if you've got a wizard in your party as well, then you don't need to learn it, and in that case you can grab Disintegrate on this character, because that will help with certain encounters as well. That's it for our Wild Magic Sorcerer. Let's talk about strategy, items, and multi-classing. So, first up, I think we need to talk about how to position with a Wild Magic Sorcerer. Basically, there are two considerations. Do we want to get close to enemies to try to make a Wild Magic Surge harm our enemy positioning? So do we want to, run up to Mizora here and try to turn her into a cat? Or do we want to stay far away from allies? Or do we want to do both? Naturally, sorcerers don't want to play next to enemies, and naturally, sorcerers do want to play next to allies. I think that in general, what you want to do is, rather than have your sorcerer play away from all of your allies, in case you set them on fire or turn them into cats, make sure that you have another character who wants to play away from the rest of the team. That could be a monk, it could be a ranger, it could be a rogue, just something that naturally plays a hit and run style away from the rest of your party, and that way you'll at least still have an active character if your sorcerer turns off the rest of your party's actions. That way that character can always just run away from combat if combat starts going badly. Remember, you can just leave combat if things are going terribly and go resurrect at Withers. So even in honor mode, you can play relatively safely if you have a runner to get away from combats. I think that will serve you better than trying to position your sorcerer to mitigate the negative effects, because it's just so difficult, and there's a lot of effects that are really bad if your sorcerer is isolated. For example, if we're really far away from our party and we summon a Cambion on top of ourselves, well, now we are alone with a very powerful enemy in the sort of mid-game, early to mid-game, and that will get us killed just as easily as turning our allies into sheep or setting them on fire. So for that reason, I think you're going to want to pair this character best with another character that plays far away from your allies. However, one caveat to that is you do want to keep this guy away from friendly NPCs. You do not want to cast leveled spells when you are near a friendly NPC, because especially on honor mode, that can instantly end your run or just ruin something that you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to recruit Jaheira and you set all the Harpers on fire, they'll turn hostile and you will just not be able to do that. You can fail quests very easily, so be very careful with your positioning around friendly NPCs. Other than that, you'll be fine. Most of the negative effects only have a range of 10 feet, but some of them are up to 30 feet, so just keep a 30-foot distance from friendly NPCs. Don't worry too much about your positioning with your party, and you'll be able to operate effectively without constricting your strategies too much. For items for this character, there's really only two things that Wild Magic Sorcerer cares about. We want to have spell save DC items, so anything that increases our spell save DC, and we want to have bonus initiative. Items like the Fistbreaker Helm that do both are even better, because we just want to go first and we want to land our spells more reliably. That's the only thing that this character cares about, and we pretty much can take any items that improve those things and ignore any other items. For some specific best in slot items, Marka Heshkir is perfect for a sorcerer because we can meta magic all of the bonus spells that it gives us. It gives you the additional spells on short rest, which gives you a lot more longevity, as well as having access to more spells. And if you get Marka Heshkir, you can swap out the lightning spells and use the lightning form of Marka Heshkir is probably the best way to do that, and then you swap out your lightning bolt and chain lightning into other more situational spells. And this character also benefits extremely powerfully from any item that has a bound spell in it, an item that lets you cast a spell. Because we want optionality, and the main thing holding this extremely powerful character back is the very restricted spell selection, any item that lets you cast any spell is very good. Obviously, the Gloves of Cinder and Sizzle aren't like really made for a sorcerer, but regardless of what the spell is that you find on an item, it is worth considering for this character and is very worth equipping and casting, because having that optionality can really help you out in various tactical situations. For that reason also, and just because you make an incredible scroll user, this character does extremely well being your scroll caster. Scrolls, you can use meta magic on scrolls, so a sorcerer gains way more benefit from scrolls than any other character, but also this works really well with mitigating the downsides of the character. Your restricted optionality is totally resolved by having a stack of scrolls, especially scrolls of situational but very, very powerful spells like Dimension Door, Auto-Irresistible Dance, and Disintegrate, which are useful in some encounters but not in every encounter. You can cast those from scrolls and have them be just game-winning all on their own. So those are the things that you're looking for in terms of items, and that will give you a great setup, but really it's just about spell save DCs and initiative, because you just want to reliably go first and land your spells when you go. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Wild Magic Sorcerer. I think this character is incredibly fun to play, and the randomness is really hilarious. Just great fun all the way through the game. And if you have enjoyed it, then of course feel free to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.